Evan Mercer had always believed silence was a kind of armor, thin, fragile, but enough to hold back whatever threatened to overwhelm him. Yet as he stood in the dim hallway of his family home, listening to Caleb Rourke's footsteps approaching, he realized his armor was beginning to crack. Moving back into the house had been a temporary decision, a financial detour after a job collapse, but the emotional weight of this place had arrived instantly, clinging to him like humidity in late summer. Caleb appeared at the far end of the hall, crisp shirt sleeves rolled above his elbows, expression set in its usual mixture of confidence and impatience. At 48, Caleb carried himself with the deliberate sharpness of someone who needed the world to recognize him. His presence was neither aggressive nor comforting, only dense, as if every room shifted beneath his mood. "You're up early," Caleb said, voice smooth but edged. "Planning something for the day?" Evan kept his shoulders relaxed. "Just heading out for coffee." "With who?" The question landed with the familiar weight of scrutiny. Caleb had a way of asking ordinary things as if they were cross-examination. "Nobody," Evan replied. "Just coffee." Caleb nodded slowly, unsatisfied but unwilling to push further, for now. He moved past Evan, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and the pressure of unspoken expectations. The exchange lasted seconds, but it ignited the tension that had been simmering since Evan returned home. Caleb's need to supervise, to guide, to shape, to correct. Evan stepped outside into the cool morning air and exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath since their conversation began. He walked the 4 blocks to Harbor Lane, where a small corner cafe sat tucked between a bookstore and a tailor's shop. He had discovered it by accident his first week back, and it quickly became his temporary sanctuary. Inside, soft jazz spilled from ceiling speakers, and the aroma of roasted beans cut through his restlessness. He ordered his usual and sat by the window, watching early commuters drift past. It was there, mid-sip, that he first noticed the man sketching at the next table, tall, quietly absorbed in his work, with messy auburn hair and hands stained faintly with charcoal. Mason Hale radiated a calm that contrasted sharply with Caleb's constant vigilance. Evan tried not to stare, but curiosity tugged at him. He wasn't used to noticing people so quickly. Mason glanced up, caught Evan looking, and smiled, an unguarded, warm smile that felt completely different from the measured ones Evan had grown accustomed to at home. "Good morning," Mason said. His voice carried a softness, like he'd learned to measure his words carefully, not out of fear but out of consideration. Evan returned the smile. "Morning. What are you working on?" Mason angled his sketchbook just enough for Evan to see, a loosely drawn portrait of an older couple laughing on a park bench. Evan admired the movement in the lines, the way Mason captured emotion rather than detail. "That's impressive," Evan said, "just a warm-up." "Helps my brain wake up," Mason replied. "Are you from around here?" "Kind of." Evan hesitated, choosing his words. "I grew up here. Moved away. Now I'm back for a while." Mason nodded, sensing the heaviness Evan didn't articulate. "Well, if you ever need company here, I'm usually around." The conversation drifted from art to music to trivial morning observations, each exchange smoothing the edge of the day. It lasted maybe 10 minutes, but by the time Evan left, he realized the emptiness he'd carried had shifted, just slightly, but noticeably. When he returned home, the house felt heavier than before. It wasn't the walls or the narrow hallways, it was the awareness that he'd felt lighter elsewhere. And deeply, stubbornly, Caleb sensed it too. Caleb looked up from the dining table as Evan stepped inside. "You were gone longer than usual." A statement, not a question. "I took a walk after coffee," Evan answered, keeping his tone neutral. "With someone?" Caleb pressed. Evan swallowed, irritation flickering under his restraint. "Caleb. I really need you to stop monitoring everything I do." It was the first time he said it directly. The air in the room tightened, as if the walls leaned in to listen. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Monitoring? That's dramatic. I'm trying to help you rebuild your life. I care. Someone has to." The emphasis was too sharp, too pointed. Evan felt the old frustration rise, but he kept himself grounded. "I appreciate concern. I don't appreciate control." Caleb stood slowly, pushing his chair back with deliberate calm. Your mother worries. I check in so she doesn't have to. Evan remained silent. They both knew Linda rarely involved herself in these tensions. She avoided conflict with a kind of practiced grace that left Evan mostly alone in the middle. Caleb exhaled, a controlled breath. If you're seeing someone new, if that's what this is, just be careful. People aren't always what they seem. Evan blinked, taken aback. I just got coffee, that's all. Caleb didn't respond. His gaze was sharp, calculating, as though he were trying to read the parts of Evan he didn't have access to. Then he walked away without another word, but his silence carried more suspicion than any accusation could. The rest of the day moved slowly. Evan tried to focus on job applications, but his mind drifted repeatedly, first to Mason's sketch, then to Caleb's probing gaze. The contrast between them unsettled him in ways he couldn't fully name. That evening, as Evan stepped into his room to finally retreat into quiet, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Hey, it's Mason, from the cafe. If you're around tomorrow, I'd like to show you something I think you'll appreciate. No pressure. A small smile tugged at Evan's lips. The message felt gentle, unassuming, something refreshing in a house filled with tension that he typed back a simple sure. What time? Before he could settle into bed, a shadow crossed his doorway. Caleb stood there, expression unreadable. You're going out tomorrow? He asked. Evan froze. Caleb, please. I just want privacy. Caleb didn't budge. I'm not stopping you. I just think you should be careful about who you trust. There it was again, that same note of implication, as if Caleb sensed too much yet understood too little. Evan drew a breath and met his gaze calmly. I'll be fine. And he would be. At least, he hoped so. As the door closed, Evan felt something shift, subtle but significant. For the first time since returning home, he sensed the possibility of a life beyond these suffocating walls. But he also sensed something else. Caleb wasn't done asking questions, and the road ahead was about to twist in ways he hadn't imagined. The room went quiet, but suspense settled deeper, as if the story he hadn't meant to start was already unfolding without permission. In the days that followed, nothing in the office looked different, yet everything felt altered. Evan Mercer tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy, typing reports, attending meetings, responding to emails, but a subtle crack had formed in the rhythm of his routine. It widened every time his phone vibrated, every time footsteps approached his desk, every time he heard the low timbre of Caleb Rowan's voice drifting across the floor. He told himself he could ignore the message. Pretend the conversation had been misinterpreted. Pretend that the promotion discussion had been nothing more than an awkward misunderstanding. But pretending became impossible when Caleb began to orbit him with alarming precision. On Monday, Caleb passed by his cubicle twice, once to comment on the accuracy of his weekly summary, and again to ask for an updated set of projections, even though Evan knew he already had them. On Tuesday, Caleb stopped him in the hall and remarked on the potential for leadership in his recent presentation, though Evan hadn't given any presentation. By Wednesday, co-workers began whispering, "Seems like the boss finally noticed you," someone teased near the break room, "or he wants something," another murmured under their breath. Evan pretended not to hear. He tried to lose himself in spreadsheets, hoping numbers might drown out the slow invasion of doubt creeping through him. Yet the more he worked, the more he felt Caleb's presence, not physically but psychologically, like a shadow that stretched no matter where he stood. That evening, Jordan Hale waited for him at home with 2 plates of dinner already cooling on the table. Jordan rarely cooked on weekdays, his job kept him busy, and evenings were often simple affairs. But tonight, he had tried. Evan noticed immediately, though he didn't mention it. "You're late again," Jordan said, masking concern beneath mild annoyance. "Caleb asked for extra reports," Evan replied, slipping off his jacket. "Deadlines shifted." Jordan studied him a moment too long. "Are you okay? You haven't been yourself." Evan forced a thin smile. "Just stressed." "It's nothing." But Jordan wasn't convinced. His dark eyes softened with worry. "You know you can talk to me." Evan nodded, but the words he needed to say lodged somewhere unreachable. How could he explain a situation that wasn't entirely clear even to him? How could he describe something that felt both threatening and flattering, wrong and strangely magnetic? Instead, he said nothing. They ate quietly, and later Jordan reached for his hand on the couch. Evan gently pulled away, pretending he needed to check something on his phone. Another message waited, from Caleb, tomorrow. My office. 6 p.m. Evan deleted it before Jordan could glance over. The next day crawled by with tense anticipation. Evan noticed that Caleb didn't approach him once, as if granting him space would make the pull stronger. By the time the clock neared 6, Evan found himself walking toward the private office with a mix of dread and inevitability. Caleb was waiting, leaning against the edge of his desk with sleeves rolled, posture deliberately informal. You came, he said, almost sounding satisfied. I wasn't sure if I should, Evan replied cautiously. That's exactly why you should. Caleb motioned for him to close the door. The gesture wasn't forceful, but its expectation was unmistakable. Evan complied. Caleb's eyes traveled over him with a calm, assessing curiosity. You've been avoiding me. I've been busy. You've been conflicted, Caleb corrected, stepping closer, not enough to touch, but close enough for Evan to sense the faintest trace of cologne again. That's fine. Most people are, when they're offered something they didn't expect. Evan steadied his breath. You said you could help me with the promotion. I can. Caleb crossed his arms, the fabric of his shirt stretching slightly over his shoulders. But I don't want to help someone who's uncertain about where they stand with me. Evan swallowed. What do you want from me, exactly? Caleb smiled, slow, knowing, controlled. Trust. Loyalty. And alignment. He tilted his head. I think you understand what that means. There it was again, the implication that needed no explanation. A subtle pressure. A silent demand wrapped in calm, almost gentle phrasing. Evan took a step back, but Caleb followed with his voice rather than his body. You're ambitious, Evan. You're smart. And I see something in you that others don't. You feel that, don't you? His words lowered, almost coaxing. I make you feel seen. The statement hit deeper than expected. Evan hated that it was partly true. He had spent years being overlooked, undervalued, lost in the corporate noise. Caleb's attention, unsettling as it was, felt like a spotlight. Dangerous, but intoxicating. I don't know what I feel, Evan admitted quietly. Caleb studied him with an expression that bordered on tenderness. You don't have to decide tonight. He reached out, not touching, just letting his hand hover as if offering a choice. But don't lie to yourself. Something is happening here. Before Evan could respond, a knock sounded on the door. Caleb straightened instantly, and Evan stepped aside. A junior associate entered, apologizing for interrupting. Caleb dismissed him with a curt nod, but the interruption had broken the moment. We'll continue this later, Caleb said, his voice returning to professional neutrality. Go home. Think. Evan left the room with his pulse still unsteady. As he walked through the quiet office, he felt as though each step echoed with consequences he hadn't agreed to, but the consequences followed him home. Jordan was awake, waiting on the couch, arms crossed, not angry, but aching with unspoken fear. You didn't call, he said. I lost track of time. Jordan opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it. Instead, he picked up Evan's phone and handed it to him. Your screen buzzed earlier. You got a message. Evan's blood chilled. Caleb's name wasn't on the screen, he had deleted the message, but Jordan was watching him with unmistakable suspicion. Who keeps messaging you so late lately? Jordan asked softly. Evan forced a steady breath. Just work. Jordan nodded, though the tension in his jaw said he didn't believe it. When Evan turned away, the weight of Jordan's quiet disappointment pressed into his spine. He had always been honest before. Always open. Always steady. Now silence slithered between them like a dividing line. Later, when Jordan went to bed, Evan remained awake on the couch, staring at the darkened ceiling. That he knew he was losing himself, that he just didn't know whether he was losing himself to Caleb, or running from the truth looming inside him. Either way, something had already broken, and he couldn't pretend he didn't feel it anymore. By the next morning, Evan Mercer felt as if he were stepping into a version of his own life that no longer belonged to him. Every hallway felt narrower, every fluorescent light harsher, every whisper sharper. He carried the weight of two worlds, Caleb Rowan's growing shadow and Jordan Hale's fading warmth, as if they were pulling him in opposite directions. When he reached his desk, a single sticky note was waiting for him. Caleb's handwriting, unmistakably smooth and deliberate, Conference Room 7A. Noon. Do not be late. There was no signature, no explanation, just expectation. Evan stared at the note until the edges blurred. Something inside him tightened, not quite fear, not quite desire, something far more complicated. He folded the paper into his pocket and tried to survive the next few hours without imagining what awaited him behind the glass walls of 7A. Noon, he made his way down the quiet corridor. The conference room sat at the far end, where sunlight filtered through tall windows and cast long, pale beams across the floor. Caleb stood inside, hands resting on the back of a chair, posture calm, almost welcoming. You came, Caleb said, closing the door behind him. You asked me to, Evan replied. Caleb's eyes lifted to meet his, searching, calculating. You don't have to come to every meeting I call. You choose to. Evan opened his mouth to argue, but the words dissolved. Caleb wasn't wrong. Each step he took toward this room, this man, was a choice, even if the choices felt coerced by ambition, loneliness, or confusion. Caleb motioned toward the seat across from him. Sit. Evan did. The moment he sat down, Caleb leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low but steady. You're unraveling, Evan. I see it in your eyes. Evan stiffened. I'm fine. You're lying to me, Caleb said gently. Just like you're lying to yourself. And I'd imagine, lying to Jordan. Evan's chest tightened. Leave Jordan out of this. I can't. Caleb's tone didn't rise, but it cut effortlessly. Because this isn't only about your promotion anymore. This is about who you are becoming. Evan looked away, unable to meet the intensity of Caleb's gaze. I never asked for any of this. Didn't you? Caleb stood and walked slowly around the table until he was behind Evan. You wanted recognition. You wanted to be chosen. You wanted someone to see your worth. Evan closed his eyes as Caleb's voice drifted closer, not touching him, not crossing that final boundary, but standing just near enough for the air to shift. And now someone does, Caleb continued softly. I see you, Evan. More clearly than anyone. The confession, or manipulation, settled like a weight on Evan's shoulders. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't tender. Yet it held him still. Caleb stepped back to the head of the table, reclaiming his authority as if nothing had happened. Your performance review is next week. I can elevate you, or I can let the company overlook you again. He folded his hands. What happens depends on whether we're aligned. The room darkened for a second as a cloud passed over the sun, creating a fleeting eclipse across the polished table. Evan felt the metaphor too strongly to ignore. I need time, Evan said finally. No, Caleb replied, calm and immovable. You need clarity. Evan stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I'm not agreeing to anything. You already have, Caleb said, voice a quiet trap. Your presence here is already a choice. Evan left the room without another word. The silence in his apartment that night felt heavier than the one in the conference room. Jordan sat at the far end of the couch, arms crossed tightly, as Evan walked in. The television flickered with muted colors, but neither of them looked at it. You didn't come home last night until almost midnight, Jordan said quietly. I stayed late for work. That's becoming a pattern, Jordan replied. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Evan hesitated. It's complicated. Jordan shook his head. Then simplify it. The simplicity Evan needed most, truth, was the very thing he feared. Not because it exposed Caleb's intentions, but because it exposed his own weakness in being drawn into them. Jordan stood and faced him. I've always trusted you, Evan. But lately, it feels like I'm losing you to something I can't see. It's not like that, Evan insisted, though the sentence trembled. Jordan stepped closer. Then help me understand. Please. Evan's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Silence poured out instead, damaging, defenseless, devastating. Jordan's expression softened into hurt. If you won't talk to me, I don't know how to be here with you. The word struck harder than any accusation Caleb could ever make. Evan reached out instinctively, but Jordan stepped back, shaking his head. Think about what you want, Jordan whispered. Because right now, it feels like you don't want us. Jordan walked into the bedroom and closed the door gently, an act far more painful than a slam. Evan stood frozen in the living room, staring at the closed door, hating himself for letting the silence win. The next morning brought no relief. Evan moved through the office like a ghost, avoiding Caleb's gaze, avoiding anyone who might ask how he was doing, but despite every attempt to distance himself, conflict found him. At lunchtime, as Evan walked past the elevators, a familiar voice echoed through the hallway. Evan. Caleb. Evan didn't turn around immediately, but Caleb approached with the ease of someone used to being followed. I need to speak with you, Caleb said. I can't do this right now, Evan replied, trying to walk away. Caleb blocked his path, not aggressively, but assertively. This isn't about last night. This is about your future. Evan exhaled shakily. My future shouldn't depend on this. It already does, Caleb said. Whether you admit it or not. Before Evan could respond, Caleb's expression shifted from demanding to calculating. He glanced around the hallway, then lowered his voice. You're not the only one who's been watching you. Evan froze. What does that mean? You'll find out soon enough. Caleb stepped aside, allowing him to pass. But remember, Evan, alignment protects you. Distance exposes you. Evan walked away, pulse pounding, confusion spiraling. When he reached his desk, his screen lit up with a new email. No sender name. No subject line, only one sentence. I know what Caleb did to you. Evan stared at the message, dread rushing through him like an icy current. Someone else knew, someone was watching, and this was only the beginning.